Welcome to The Format by Chorus Studios. Technology is always changing, and so is the format, or how we produce and consume media. The Format is a monthly newsletter on Substack and a podcast, where I, Flo of Chorus Studios, talk to you, producers, co-hosts, founders, about the newest and the best practices in podcasting today and tomorrow. From technique to technology, we will explore what new AI tools are podcasters using and why. How to prep for a podcast interview as a host or a guest. Which mics are best for your budget? And even, what happens in your brain when you listen to a podcast? So I hope you'll join me on The Format on Substack. Hello, hello, hello. And welcome to the desk of Flo. I just got back from a walk, and I find that whenever I have to do something challenging, like talk to a camera with a microphone by myself, I like to go for a walk. And there's research that says just the act of moving forward through space and having scenery pass by you helps your brain have new interesting thoughts, get a little calmer. If I can find that study, I will link it here. So we just got back from a walk. It's a beautiful spring day in Raleigh. And I'd like to give a shout out to Anna Xavier, who is an amazing podcast coach. Her podcast is called The Podcast Space. And if you are a podcaster, it's a must listen to. She has the most amazing personality. As I was walking right before I sat down to record this, or stood up to record this, I listened to some of Anna's episodes, a quick guide to micro podcast episodes, and really gave me the support that I needed to make this short form content for you today. So thank you, Anna. But this little episode is meant to be a place where folks who I either know or I don't know yet, who are interested in creating a podcast, maybe interested in working with me, just want to wrap their mind around, why would I make a podcast? And how would where would I even start? So I'm going to go over a few podcast 101 things, like what are the most popular types of podcasts and how do you discern the difference between them? Sort of like how in film, you have feature films, you have documentary, you have news. So in podcasting, we have similar themes that have popped up in the format. We're also going to talk about why podcasting in the first place. What are the benefits of doing a podcast versus having a YouTube channel or focusing on social media content, etc. Budget. So different types of podcasts have general themes around budget. So we'll talk about that. And we're also going to talk a little bit about podcast branding. So how to think about creating a podcast brand and how to do that. So I hope this is helpful for those of you out there who are just starting to think about podcasting and want to orient your thoughts around the benefits, the options, the costs, etc. All right, so one of the hard things about podcasting, especially when you don't have a guest, is you have to just talk to the camera like I am right now. And it's actually really great practice because the truth is no one likes the way they look. And if you're lucky, you'll like the way you sound. I like the way I sound. So I've got that going. But I don't love the way I look, especially right now with my braces. And also, my braces give me a little lisp. So, I'm not at my most confident right now, but that's okay. As Anna says, keep making imperfect content. And honestly, as we jump into these topics, it really fits in because being vulnerable and being your authentic self is actually one of the most powerful things you can do in any media format, but especially podcasting, because as I started off in video, I love music videos, I love documentaries, and I do hope to get to do some of that in the future. However, I love podcasting because of how authentic it can be. It's so personal when you're listening to someone's voice in your ear while you're walking your dog or doing your laundry. You're like having this intimate experience with this person in your head talking to you. And so you're just taking in the content of what they're saying and the tone of how they're saying it. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. And then because podcasting is a new format, I mean, it's basically radio on the internet, but it's had this sort of culture of freestyle, and authenticity and raw and like break the mold and have open conversations and have truthful, vulnerable conversations. And I love that. I'm all about that. So I hope that doesn't change. And I think if you jump on the podcasting bandwagon, you can still enjoy that trend of everybody really enjoying creating and consuming authentic content via podcasts. So, and again, I think it's probably because people aren't on camera. They feel like, although I do put a lot of my shows on YouTube as well with the camera, but just the idea that you aren't being watched, but you're being heard, I think allows people to feel more safe to express themselves. And that's where the good content comes in, if you ask me. Another reason I got into it was because it's a little bit more affordable than video. And I say that tentatively because, of course, if you're working with producers who do shows for NPR or some of these bigger productions, it can still be very expensive to produce a podcast. However, it's also very accessible to produce a podcast. There's some amazing tips that make it so much easier than it used to be. One of those tools is Descript, which I'm using right now. It will automatically transcribe everything I'm recording so that when I edit it, I can listen to it, watch it, and read it all at the same time. And when I first started, I had to edit in Audition, which is just the sound waves. So I'd have to listen and figure out which sound waves were which words and cut those. And that was a lot harder. It's also audio focused. So with video, you have to have beautiful imagery and beautiful audio. But with podcasts, you can have the video if you want, but if it's not great, no one's going to judge you because it's not a video, it's a podcast. So just not having to focus on having amazing video will allow you to make more affordable content. And there are a lot of great mics. I have a very expensive mic, but I do podcasting professionally, so it makes sense for me. But you can use your iPhone and just make sure it's not moving and making weird noises, and you should be fine. I love that it's more affordable than video, so folks like myself or my clients can get going on a lower budget, a more affordable budget. The next thing I love about it is it's long form. So this allows for two things. Unlike shorter videos or scripted videos that might feel less authentic or have less context, these long form pieces of content allow for greater depth, greater connection between you and your audience. Most podcasts are at least 30 minutes. You've got some that are shorter, some that are longer, all good. But typically it's a conversation with someone, like a sit-down conversation or a sit-down story for like an hour or a little less, a little more. And in addition to all that beautiful context and deeper connection, it's also a lot of content for you to use throughout the coming weeks, months, however long. And that content can be split up. I mean, it costs money to make little videos out of it, but you don't have to produce a new video every time you want to make a new piece of content. You can just go into Descript or Adobe Premiere or Splice on your phone, whatever editing app you use, and you could make a visual soundbite with the actual video from the show. You could add in B-roll if they're telling a story about one time in Africa. When they're talking about being in safari, you can put an imagery of safaris and create this cool experience for their audience to visualize their story. Check out some examples of this I've made in the summary. And it's all content coming from this one recording session you did. You can also create blogs out of the content. You can write them yourself, which is always a good idea, or there's so many amazing AI tools now to help you get started on blogs. One of my favorites is actually Firefly's AI. It's a little pricey, but you can use it for all of your Zoom calls, and you can upload video and audio, and it will analyze it. It'll give you outlines. It'll produce blogs if you prompt it to. And I use that for the format on Substack. So every time I release an episode, I release the video, the audio on podcast streaming apps the video on YouTube, clips of it on Instagram, and then also a blog that I used Firefly's AI to help me write, where it summarizes the main points from the episode. And that way, that content is getting freaking used. And in this day and age, when time is money, you can save time and money by producing a lot of content from one interview. So that's another thing I love about podcasts. So those are some reasons to think about starting one. If you have a business or a brand, instead of doing a blog, you could do a pod blog, which is a combination of a blog and a podcast. And maybe it'll be more time efficient for you if you can just have an interview with someone that you want to work with or that you want to learn from. You might be surprised how many connections you can make by having someone on a podcast. It's an awesome way to connect with folks in your industry that you've been wanting to connect with, and not just connect with them, but help them get their message out, show off to the world this beautiful conversation you had and this relationship you're building in an authentic way. And you can turn that into a blog and a podcast and social media sound bites, and might be a good thing to try out for your business. I can help you with that. So budget and types of podcasts. So there are lots of types of podcasts, but I will say, in my experience, there are 2 or 3 main categories of podcasts. One is probably the most common, which is the interview format, where it's two people having a conversation and it's recorded. Another type is a narrative podcast. So think Serial and other shows where when you're listening to it, you hear there's a narrator and then there's characters speaking and then there's background noise of like foliage when they're walking in the forest, crinkling. And like the wind blows and you hear like that. Those are basically like feature films, but in audio format. And I call them narrative because they're typically very story driven. Then there's news. There's the same people or segments each time. Those are the 2 or 3 types of podcasts that I notice the most. Comment if there's a big one that I'm missing or that I need to get to know better. And so budget. So when I was in grad school, I took a podcast production class and we had to make a podcast, and Serial was really popular then. And it's freaking awesome. And, you know, I was in video audio production school, so I could add in sound effects. I could do layers of audio and create soundscapes. So I tried to do that. So actually it was about the disco era. And I interviewed my mom's friend about his experience at Studio 54. And he was telling this story about one night when he walked in, he saw this person and he heard this sound and he thought this. And so I played music, disco music and thumping. He said, I heard the thumping as I added the thumping. And, you know, you feel like you're walking into a nightclub listening to it, which is so fun and so cool. But how long did it take me to make that? Weeks, maybe months, one episode. And even then I wasn't happy with it because I'm pretty good at audio production, but I'm not a sound engineer. So, and I have high standards. So even for me, I was like, this is cool, but like, I'd want someone else to mix it and make it sound really smooth and perfect. And it was so much work. It took so much time, and time is money. So oftentimes folks come to me and they want to make narrative style shows. And I am very excited if they have the budget to help them do that. I will bring in someone to help me mix it and make it sound perfect. But they do cost more, and we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars. So most people can't afford that. So keep that in mind. Then the other big type of podcast is the interview podcast. And that's what I do mostly for myself, for my clients. And that can still be extremely professional sounding. If you have great mics, I have folks that I work with that help me improve the audio of my interview shows and mix the edits so that the edits aren't choppy and everything sounds like a very professional show. And so it doesn't sound less fancy. It's just less time to make and less resources, so more affordable. So things to keep in mind. Time is money. Narrative takes more time, costs more money, usually takes more expertise as well to make it sound just right. Yeah. So podcast branding. I love branding. I got to work at a branding and storytelling firm called Free Range Studios. It doesn't exist anymore. I was the founder's assistant, and I got to help him on some of his research and coordination on the branding for big accounts like Greenpeace International. And I learned a lot there. I learned about story worlds and making everything line up. So the colors, the music, because they produced videos there, the font, the language, the style, the tone, all of that needs to line up. An amazing brand will have a website that looks like and feels like the podcast. It looks and feels like the product, whatever that is. So that is something I love to do, and it's very client specific, but start thinking about, if you're interested in starting a podcast for your company or your brand, what kind of music would it have? You'll have an intro with music in the background. Is it upbeat? Is it bright? Is it playful? Is it a little more serious? Is it thoughtful? You can look at films and TV commercials and reflect on what emotions different music bring up when you listen to it and what you might want for your show. So intros and outros for shows are a great way to establish the brand of the show. Then from there, I like to take that and think about the visual identity for the brand or the podcast. Typically, if it's associated with a business, we'll use the same colors or complementary colors to the business. It could be, if the show is a little more playful and fun than the business, that's fine. They can be siblings of the same family or cousins and not, identical twins. As long as there's some obvious connection, then I think you're doing okay with branding. If it feels like a totally left field, like I cannot believe this podcast goes with this business, then branding's not quite there. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. I'm still learning how to talk about all the things that I do. Whatever business you're in, sometimes you just sort of know how to do things, and it's not always that easy to talk about what you do. So I expect I'll get better at it. I'd love your feedback, your thoughts, your comments, your questions, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Format. Head to substack.com, that's substack.com, to subscribe to The Format on Substack for our next monthly episode and blog about the future of podcasting. Stay real.